It's hard to imagine that 5 years ago, this past week, may have felt like the last normal week in our memory. That's because at this exact time in 2020, we might remember that the coronavirus was declared a pandemic and our lives were spun on their heads. I wasn't aware of this fateful anniversary until I saw some photos on Instagram a few days ago. And it was like immediately being transported back to that early lockdown. The supermarket shelves were empty of toilet paper and kitchen roll. There were roadblocks enforcing border closures between the various states or provinces here in Canada. There were friends sitting outside on the street 6 feet apart. And perhaps the most heartbreaking, a child looking longingly at a jungle gym that was locked up and they were unable to play. Before we knew how much our world would change, do you remember how that last piece of normal felt? Were you on holiday? Did you host 40 people during Hanukkah just a short time beforehand? Were you in your office a full 5 days a week? Do you remember what that last Purim was like as we teetered on the verge of uncertainty? I've been reflecting a lot on that tumultuous moment in time and what normal meant, what normal means in light of our Torah and the Purim festival this week. Our parasha, Ki Tisa, teaches us that a disruption to our normal can mean total rupture. It will be familiar to you as we read in it the famous incident of the golden calf. As Moses goes up to Mount Sinai to etch the 2 tablets, the Israelites begin to panic, anxious that their leader was taking too long up on the mountain. Fearing the worst, they rally around Aaron, Moses' brother, who instructs them to gather all their gold, to melt it down, and to craft it into the golden calf that we know. The plot thickens as Moses descends the mountain and sees what his people has done. Of course, he becomes enraged and shatters the 2 tablets that God has just given him. Moses will shortly thereafter ascend Mount Sinai once more and receive a second set of tablets. Our rabbis will later ask the good question, what happened to the first set of tablets? They will teach us in the Talmud that these broken fragments, the remnants of the originals, were placed in the Ark of the Covenant and subsequently transported with us in the tabernacle throughout our wilderness wanderings. In other words, these disruptions to our regular, like the pandemic, can undoubtedly be immensely difficult and contain the potential to impact us for the rest of our days. We can see that there is this strong, almost seismic reaction to this disruption, to the absence of normal on behalf of the Israelites. Maybe that's only natural, given the strange circumstance they faced of the leader leaving and their absence being felt within their community for 40 days and 40 nights. This rebellion, this building and dancing around the golden calf suggests that the Israelites were thrown off of their regular routine and subsequently felt the need to cling to something new and tangible in their midst, in the form of a physical deity, though this does not, of course, excuse their behavior after being commanded many times beforehand to worship only the one true God. This disruption, we can see, even has the potential to break us, with God, ironically, in the conclusion of our parasha, ironically casting a plague upon the Israelites as punishment. This kind of response to the abnormal highlights that under such duress we can acknowledge the pain and that we carry these pieces forward as we navigate our way towards a new normal, a little more frayed and a little more fractured than beforehand. Conversely, disruption can push us forwards. We just celebrated Purim, in which we read in the Megillah, ובשנים-עשר חודש הוא חודש אדר, ב13 יום בו אשר הגיע דבר המלך ודתו, להעשות ביום אשר שיברו אויבי היהודים לשלוט בהם, ונהפוך הוא, אשר ישלטו היהודים המה בשונאיהם. And so on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is, the month of Adar, when the king's command and decree were to be done, enforced, the very day on which the enemies of the Jews had expected to break them, to gain power over them, the opposite happened, and the Jews gained power over their enemies. Here I want to point out two words or phrases. One is shibru, from the Hebrew root shavar, meaning to break. It is, in its classic way, a subtle, beautiful hint that, like with the two tablets, there were two paths laid out before the Israelites. One, the potential to become overwhelmed by the disruption and overwhelmed by the challenge at hand, to be broken by it. The second path is to be found in our next phrase, which tells us, v'nahafochu, the opposite or the reverse happened. In other words, the coin was flipped on its tail, and the lots that were literally cast were thrown back in the faces of our adversaries. When we expected to be broken, we remained unexpectedly unbroken. Purim is, after all, a quintessential festival of the reverse, of the defying of normal. Queen Esther reverses her lot in life, rising up from royalty, from orphan to royalty. Mordechai goes from being a regular citizen to the king's most trusted advisor. Haman, our villain, goes from trusted advisor to an executed prisoner. Today, we wear costumes concealing our identities, perhaps granting us the permission or the confidence to act in ways we often wouldn't. Most importantly, we, the Jewish people, go from a persecuted and rather pitiful minority to an empowered people who defend themselves against the challenges in front of us. Today, the phrase v'nahafochu is not just used in reference to Purim. It can be used to remark upon any surprising reversal, whether communal or personal. In moments of unrelenting hardship, in times such as these, as Levi did refer to, it can even be used to invoke a message of hope and strength. The Midrash Esther Rabbah suggests that this saving of the Jews from Haman's wicked ways was the greatest miracle that we have witnessed by God's hand, through our vengeance and triumph over our enemies, the likes of which we had not enacted previously. The abnormal piece, God famously is not mentioned once in the Megillah. Purim subsequently becomes a celebration of our not normal, a holiday of feasting and merriment, of feeling joy and spreading joy, of seeing the miracles hidden in the everyday, and the belief that the impossible might just be possible after all. Put differently, we can learn to revel in absurdity and abnormality and in fact become stronger from it. As we conclude, we might learn that a lack of normality is and always has been part of the Jewish and perhaps part of the human condition. We have experienced this at different times in our Jewish and human story, whether it's a pandemic or any number of things we can look around and see in our current world. We can recognize that when there is a schism in our normal, it can leave us a little bit broken, and we can and we will carry those pieces with us for the rest of our days. Nonetheless, perhaps Purim and its injunction to turn everything topsy-turvy comes to remind us that normal is boring, and normal is part of what makes life interesting. Let us face disruption with the courage to keep saying v'nahafochu. Let those opposites keep happening, because they will, and let us be strengthened by them. Shabbat Shalom.